Welcome back. I'm Alan Brooks.
And I'm Brad Winkleski.
Brad, we've spent almost a month, man, tearing apart backup, tearing apart, all the different technologies, the file-based backup, the hybrid, the tapes, the mass storage devices, the image-based. And we've talked about usage scenarios, but I think what would be cool today is to discuss a real-life scenario. In reality, what a customer had happen and what we were able to do as a managed service provider to remediate that thing. So, let's start with the simplest. Let's talk about a file-based restoration in a real-life scenario. And, what do we do?
Yeah, the restore time obviously will vary depending upon how much data you actually have to restore. But, we've had several cases of files being deleted, accidentally moved, accidentally overwritten. I mean, you name it, we've had it happen. One thing that sticks out in my mind though is basically like a tracking spreadsheet for HR, and basically you talk about vacation days and things like that, and that file was basically accidentally overwritten with a previous copy. And so the simple request was, hey, I need this other version back because I accidentally wrote over the one that I intended to keep. And for that, I mean, literally the restore time, it literally took as long as it took to take the 14 kilobytes and drag it back to the desktop. That is really the most straightforward and quite honestly the quickest, because it's usually one single file. It's usually going back to the exact same location, and it's not really that big. Then again, we've had cases where an entire somebody's laptop died, for instance, and they needed to restore. They rebuilt that person's profile onto a different system, and then they want to drag back all their old My Documents files. And so that is because there's more files, because there's a lot more data, it takes a little bit longer. But those are two scenarios that we've actually had. Again, one took literally moments. One took 3 to 4 hours because they had a pretty big internet circuit, but they needed a lot of data restored too.
And that's a file-based scenario. And what's important is to talk about the management of that as well. And we've talked about that a lot, but the user would call a managed backup provider and say, hey, listen, I need you to do this. You have access to my machine. Restore that previous copy of that Excel document to here. So that's part of the managed backup, offering.
Yeah, and because we know the customer's environment relatively well, they don't have to give us all the information about what date, what file. I mean, we assume a lot of those things. In fact, they can just get us pointed in the right direction and say, hey, this file from my HR director needs to be restored. Like you said, we basically run down the trail of, okay, how many generations do we have? What dates are they from? And we give them the option, like, here's what we have, which one do you want? And so they can basically go on about their day while they're, while all this is going on. It's a great point.
And I think, we could talk about the tapes, we could talk about that, but it's restoring a file really. The architecture doesn't matter as much. But this next question I'm going to ask you, I think could, really be impactful. So tell me about not just a restoration on a hybrid based cloud solution. Tell me about a real problem it solved, maybe for remote access or something like that.
Yeah, we had a customer who had this hybrid type of backup in place, and they basically had 3 servers that are in production. One was their domain controller and admin server, one was their file server, and the other one was covered their remote access. And they're the one that covered remote access, actually that server died. So here we are now with basically a problem, as you mentioned, and they now have nobody able to remote in to their system. Now, because they were architected in a specific way, we were able to help them in a specific way. However, that's always the case, right? There's always things that change. But so for their 3 production servers, they actually had a 4th server that they literally had just sunset because they had moved to a hosted Exchange environment. And so here we had, hosted Exchange environment. And so this was basically an extra server, let's call it. And so we were in a really, really good position. We had 3 production systems that they needed. They had one that was basically already installed with Windows at the right level, but it just was fulfilling a different role before. And so essentially they had an extra server on premise. And so what we were able to do then is we were able to take basically the files needed from that remote access server and dump them back to that other platform that was already stood up. And then after that data was there, we took the system state and restored it to that extra server, let's call it. And so that basically gave it the exact same personality, profile, and IP address and all that stuff of the remote access server. And so you basically, because we had that extra server on premise and just so happened to have everything already installed, we were able to take that customer from the reporting of the incident, like, oh my gosh, I am down, and within 5 hours, they were literally back up and running in exactly the same profile they were before. And they just ended up taking the that server that had died because it ended up being a hardware issue, nothing to be fixed there, and they just ended up chucking it, and they were back up and running.
We haven't spoke about that. You just said hardware issue. One of the things I think neat to talk about is the reasons we're restoring, and it's a lot of time it's human error, deletion, misplacement of a file, or it's hardware. And very few times it's a natural disaster, right? In fact, I'm not certain we've actually seen a natural disaster in our practice. However, cross over into this hybrid solution, which we spoke about and did a segment on. What are some other cool life scenarios you've seen somebody do with actually file sharing maybe across this hybrid solution? I mean, we talked about one of our customers in Georgia potentially replacing a file server with this thing. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. I was out to lunch there for a bit. Yeah. So this customer, one of the customers we have here in Georgia, as you mentioned, they do have a file server locally that's serving files. But as it pertains to their remote users, they had trouble extending those things out there. So they took that hybrid. Appliance or platform, and they decided to hey, I'm going to sunset my traditional file server. I'm going to dump this thing into the same appliance that's doing my backups and things like that, and I'm going to share those files externally in that way. And so one, it allows them to save capital on the monitoring and the maintenance and everything like that on that file server itself, and it gives them the opportunity to kind of aggregate their cost for backups and some other things to share those files on that device.
And what you see is not just in the backup technology and technology in general, everybody's crossing these boundaries and these borders into in different scenarios. I mean, you would have never thought of backup as being an actual file share situation, before. That was your security ring, that was your last resort. And now you're actually using that in production a little bit more, so it's good.
Yeah, and it really speaks to, you look at a managed service provider, one of their value propositions is, hey, we want to be the single throat to choke for these different types of things, right? And backup applications, appliance provider, all these people, that's exactly what they're shooting for is, hey, we want this thing to be a Swiss Army knife for you, not just a backup application,
So now let's talk about the king daddy rabbit of all backups, the one that I've seen personally save more scenarios and situations, and that's the full system state, the image-based backup. So tell us about a real life situation, anyone you want to talk about that we saved our butt in a situation.
Yeah, I will tell you that the examples here are probably too numerous to mention. We've had hardware failures. We have had virus infections. We've had corrupted databases, just specific instances like that where this thing was able to help us restore. The one that sticks out in my mind though is this customer was actually running in a virtual environment. So yes, you have these physical machines running the processing and basically conducting the business processes and just having the horsepower. But what ended up happening with this particular client was the storage array that was running underneath that and was supplying all the data to those workloads. Basically, there was a corruption or basically a removal of that entire storage array. And so it didn't matter how many pieces of hardware you had running. None of that mattered because the data underneath it literally just went away. This particular client, they had approximately 20 servers they were running in production. And you can just imagine, take what we just take what we just said, and on a good day, that hybrid backup, you're going to get back up in 5 hours for one.
Right.
So you're talking 20. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of time.
Right.
But with the image-based backup methodology, I mean, what we're able to do is basically go back and re-provision that storage space, and then recover from that. And the exact figure escapes me, but when we look at it, it took about 12 hours, 12 to 14 hours for all 20 servers. That customer was back up and running, just like they were before the event. And of course, the thing that was most important during that 12 to 14 hour cycle there was identifying, okay, what servers are dependent upon one another, which one needs to be up first so that all the other ones can speak to one another and things like that. And that is where, some of that is ad hoc, but some of that has to be well understood beforehand, like we've talked about.
So Brad, we've encountered so many different scenarios as a managed service provider, and regardless of what technology we've used, there's been a common thing. There's one thing that's very important, and that's the preparation. And man, I tell you hear about this all the time. Prepare, so you can respond when something happens. But in managed backup, it's so important because, no matter what technology you use, there's still obstacles that can be overcame before the event happens. And, I just think that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, just in the same way that you're preparing a speech and you run through it just to see how long it's going to take and what your tempo is and things like that, you're absolutely right. You don't want to be trying to figure out how long it's going to take you to restore your main application server in the heat of an event. And so you're so right. Both from a customer standpoint and from a managed service provider standpoint, it is really, really important to practice these things beforehand and be well prepared.